The drive felt endless, a tunnel of green collapsing behind me with every mile. Reid, that's me, a man whose life revolved around the careful dissection and meticulous resurrection of forgotten beauty, was headed towards the ultimate project. Not a Chippendale chair or a tarnished silver tea set, but a house. A whole, sprawling, decaying manor, bequeathed to me by a distant, barely remembered relative. My cousin, or was it a great-aunt? The details felt fuzzy, like static on an old radio. All Reid knew was the address, the name, Blackwood Manor. My own apartment, a sterile, perfectly organized sanctuary filled with the scent of wood polish and beeswax, felt a world away. Here, the air was already thick, even before Reid arrived, with the imagined must of centuries. Reid liked order. Reid thrived on it. My hands, calloused but precise, were accustomed to coaxing life back into inert objects, not wrestling with the chaotic sprawl of a neglected estate. But a project was a project, and the sheer scale of Blackwood Manor, as described by the solicitor, promised a challenge unlike any Reid had ever faced. The estate gates were rusted shut, choked by ivy, their ornate ironwork barely visible. Reid had to abandon my Land Rover and approach on foot, pushing through an overgrown path that felt more like a tunnel through a forgotten jungle. The house emerged slowly, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, like something half swallowed by the earth. It was vast, imposing, and utterly silent. Not the peaceful silence of a forest, but the heavy, expectant quiet of a tomb. "Well, then," I muttered, my voice swallowed by the oppressive quiet. "Here we are." The manor wasn't merely old, it felt ancient, burdened by forgotten time. Its stone walls wept dark streaks, its windows, countless dead eyes, stared out from under heavy brows of crumbling eaves. The air, even outside, was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood, or perhaps just very old, forgotten iron. I pushed open the massive oak front door. It groaned, a mournful, drawn-out sound that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Dust motes danced in these beams, a swirling galaxy of neglect. The house merely absorbed my words, leaving only the profound, unsettling quiet. This wasn't just neglect, it was an active abandonment. It felt less like a house and more like a vast, petrified organism. My meticulous nature, which usually found comfort in the potential of restoration, felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't going to be just about sandpaper and varnish. This was going to be about facing down an entity of decay itself. The first few days were a blur of practicalities. Reid cleared a space in one of the ground floor rooms, a former scullery, to serve as my temporary workshop. It was crude, but functional. Reid hauled in my tool chests, my portable workbench, and, crucially, my power tools. The rhythmic hum of the table saw, the whine of the sander, these were my anchors, the familiar sounds of order being imposed on chaos. Reid even installed heavy-duty locks and motion sensors, my own personal guards for my valuable equipment, a habit from years of working with irreplaceable antiques. Reid started small, tackling a particularly ornate, but severely water-damaged, writing desk in the grand study. As Reid worked, the house settled around me. Or perhaps it was just my imagination, but the creaks and groans seemed to take on a rhythm, a slow, deliberate breathing. Reid dismissed it as old house noises, the natural symphony of timber and stone expanding and contracting. One afternoon, Reid set down my favorite chisel, a finely balanced tool with a rosewood handle, on the workbench beside a can of wood filler. Reid turned to consult a reference book on period joinery, a thick tome Reid had brought with me. When Reid turned back, the chisel was gone. "What the?" I muttered, scanning the bench. It wasn't there. I checked the floor, under the bench, in my tool chest. Nothing. I distinctly remembered placing it there, point facing left. My system was precise. My tools had their places. "All right, Reid," I told myself, rubbing my temples. "You're tired. Long days, new environment. You put it down somewhere else." I spent another 10 minutes searching, growing increasingly frustrated. Then, as I reached for a different chisel, I found it. My rosewood chisel. It was lying on the workbench, exactly where I'd first placed it, point facing left, nestled beside the can of wood filler. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't moved it. I stood there, staring at the tool, then at my hands, then around the empty workshop. It wasn't just the house settling, it was the house observing. Later, as twilight bled through the grimy windows of the study, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching, like fingernails dragging across rough plaster, coming from the wall behind the desk I was restoring. I paused, my hand hovering over a piece of veneer. "Hello?" I called out, again. "Is there a mouse in here?" The scratching stopped. I waited. I went back to work. A few minutes later, it resumed, louder this time, accompanied by a soft, almost mournful sigh. It wasn't a mouse. It was too deliberate, too human. Only the sound of my own breathing, ragged and quick. I walked over to the wall, pressing my ear against the cold stone. Just the faint smell of damp and plaster. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable pressure on the back of my neck. The house wasn't just settling, it was waking up. The scratching led me to a section of the study wall, behind a particularly heavy tapestry depicting a hunting scene. As Reid pulled it aside, the wall beneath looked like any other, plastered and painted. But something felt off. Using a small hammer and chisel, my own chisel, which Reid now kept an unervingly close eye on, Reid carefully chipped away at the plaster. Beneath it, not brick, but a rough-hewn wooden panel, almost perfectly flush with the wall. It was cleverly disguised, sealed with ancient wax and painted over. After an hour of painstaking work, Reid managed to pry it open. Behind the panel was a small, dusty alcove. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and debris, was a single, leather-bound journal. It had no title, no markings, just the worn leather. Reid carefully pulled it out, the pages brittle and yellowed. The handwriting inside was elegant, spidery, and faded in places. It was a diary, dated from the late 17th century. Reid began to read, my breath catching in my throat. The entries detailed a slow descent into madness. He called it the Thief of Minds. It is not a ghost, an entry read, dated October 1698. It is a hunger. It steals not life, but the very essence of living. My thoughts are no longer my own. My past feels like a dream I never lived. As I read, a strange sensation crept over me. A subtle disorientation. I looked up from the journal, my eyes sweeping around the study. For a moment, I couldn't quite remember what Reid was doing, or even where Reid was. The room, familiar just seconds ago, seemed alien, its details shifting at the periphery of my vision. What was I? Reid trailed off, shaking my head. Right. The desk. Reid tried to focus, but the words from the journal echoed in my mind. The loss of self. Reid walked over to a small, tarnished mirror Reid propped against a wall. My reflection stared back, a little tired, a little drawn. But for a fleeting instant, the eyes staring back at me felt unfamiliar. Not mine. A prickle of fear, sharper than any I'd felt before, shot through me. Reid dismissed it, of course. Stress. Isolation. Reading disturbing old journals in a creepy old house was bound to mess with your head. But the feeling lingered, a subtle, unsettling hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. Reid tried to recall what Reid had had for breakfast that morning. Eggs and toast, Reid was sure. But the memory was curiously flat, lacking the usual vividness. Had Reid even eaten breakfast? Or had Reid just thought about it? The lines were beginning to blur, just a little, at the edges. The journal became my obsession. Reid devoured its contents, cross-referencing names and dates with other dusty tomes Reid found in the manor's library, or ordered online and had delivered to the nearest village post office. Disappearances, unexplained madness, sudden catatonia, all linked to Blackwood Manor. Lord Blackwood wasn't the only victim. His lineage seemed cursed, successive generations succumbing to similar ailments. The local history books were vague, speaking of a blight on the family line or the melancholy of Blackwood. But Reid knew. Reid knew it was the thief of minds. My own mind, meanwhile, felt like a sieve. Reid'd walk into a room, utterly forgetting why. I'd find myself holding a tool, unable to recall what Reid'd been working on. Days would pass, and when I tried to piece them together, there were gaping holes, like sections of film cut from a reel. One morning, I found myself standing in the workshop, my hands covered in wood dust, a half-sanded chair leg on the bench. I had no memory of starting that particular piece. What am I doing? I asked aloud, my voice sounding strained. What are you doing, Reid? My heart leaped. Who's there? I spun around, scanning the empty workshop. The power tools stood silent, dormant. The heavy locks on the door seemed more imposing than reassuring. My guards, the motion sensors and cameras I'd set up, showed nothing. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamt I was a child, but the details of my childhood were wrong, distorted. My parents had different faces, my home was a place I'd never seen. The dreams were too real, too insistent. They felt like memories, but memories that weren't mine. During the day, the waking hallucinations started. A faint, mournful music, like a distant harpsichord, that would suddenly stop. Distorted reflections in the polished surfaces of the antiques Reid was restoring, my face, but subtly wrong, elongated, or with eyes that seemed too deep-set, too ancient. One afternoon, while carefully reattaching a delicate inlay to the writing desk, Reid heard a woman's voice, clear as a bell, call my name from the doorway of the study. Reid? Reid froze, my hand shaking. My breath caught in my throat. Reid was alone in the manor. Reid knew Reid was alone. Reid turned slowly, my eyes wide. The doorway was empty. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. This was something else. Something malevolent, something that had been patiently waiting, feeding, for centuries. And now, it was feeding on me. My grip on reality, on myself, was slipping. Reid knew it. The entity's assault became unrelenting. I was in the workshop, trying to focus on repairing a broken chair leg, the familiar scent of wood glue and sawdust a desperate anchor. But my hands felt clumsy, alien. My mind felt like a storm-tossed ship. "Just focus, Reid," I muttered, my voice hoarse. One step at a time. I picked up the chair leg, ready to clamp it. But as I held it, the wood seemed to ripple, to flow like water. The grain swirled, and for a terrifying moment, the leg transformed into a gnarled, skeletal limb, clutching at me. I cried out, dropping it. It clattered to the floor, once again a simple piece of wood. My breath hitched. What was that? A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled backwards, bumping into the workbench. My reflection in the polished surface of a nearby restored cabinet flickered. My face was there, but beneath it, like a palimpsest, I saw another face. Lord Blackwood. The hum of the dormant power tools seemed to vibrate with a low, malevolent thrum. The guards I'd set up, the motion sensors, the cameras, seemed to mock me, their tiny red lights blinking like malevolent eyes. They weren't protecting me, they were watching me, keeping me here. "You're not real," I gasped, clutching my head. "None of this is real. It's the house. Or is it simply showing you the truth?" "What is truth, Reid, when your memories are gone?" Panic seized me. My name. Reid. They was. That even my name? For a horrifying second, the word felt foreign on my tongue, an unfamiliar sound. I tried to recall my childhood, a specific event, anything solid. My first bike, a red one. My grandmother's apple pie. The smell of my old workshop, the one before this. But the images were fractured, like broken glass. I could see the bike, but not me riding it. I could smell the pie, but I couldn't remember my grandmother's face. I looked at my hands. These hands, so skilled, so precise. What had they done? Who had they belonged to? I felt a terrifying detachment, as if I were observing them from a great distance. "Reid am Reid," I repeated, a desperate mantra. "Reid am an antique restorer. Reid live in. Reid live in." The address of my old apartment. It was gone. Completely, utterly gone. My mind was a blank slate where the crucial piece of information should have been. The entity wasn't just taking my memories, it was replacing them. I saw fleeting glimpses of other lives, other identities. A woman in a Victorian dress, weeping silently. A stoic man in a military uniform, staring out a window. Lord Blackwood, pacing his study, clutching his head. Were these the previous victims? Or was I becoming them? I stumbled, falling to my knees amidst the wood shavings. My own reflection in a puddle of spilled water showed a face that was undeniably mine, but the eyes. The eyes were filled with an ancient weariness, a profound sorrow that didn't belong to me. My identity, my sense of self, was fraying, unraveling like an old tapestry. I was a patchwork of forgotten lives, a vessel for 1,000 stolen memories, with less and less of Reid remaining. The line between reality and the entity's twisted delusion had not just blurred, it had dissolved entirely. A sudden, desperate surge of self-preservation clawed its way through the fog in my mind. I had to leave. I had to get out. The manor was a tomb, and it was burying me alive. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking. The workshop, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The power tools, usually comforting in their silent readiness, seemed to hum with a low, malevolent energy, like predatory beasts. My voice sounded thin, reedy. I lunged for the workshop door, fumbling with the heavy deadbolt. My fingers, once so nimble, were clumsy, numb. The lock clicked open. But the hallway was wrong. It wasn't the hallway I remembered. It stretched endlessly, disappearing into an impossible distance, the walls shifting and wavering as if made of smoke. The air was thick with the metallic sweet scent I now recognized as decay, the scent of forgotten lives. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if dragging through thick mud. Each step was an immense effort. I stumbled.